Welcome back. Now we can finish off the front surface of our airbag. The next step is to trim this to the shape of our airbag. And this is going to be very important because the geometry you create in the sketch to trim this airbag is going to define the edges of our surface. So we're going to start a sketch on the front plane. And we want to remember that when we created the base of our steering wheel here, that we used an arc for this upper edge. And if you look at the geometry here, this bottom of our airbag actually follows that geometry fairly well. But the upper portion of our airbag is actually a slightly different curvature here. So we want to make sure that we don't accidentally apply some sort of concentric relation with that arc we created. I'm going to start by adding a 3-point arc. And we have a point to snap to now because this is where the extruded surface started. And that was our reference line from our front plane. I'm just going to drag this out to approximately where it looks like another section of curvature starts. And then I'm going to apply a tangent relation with the edge of our surface. Now I know that this tangent relation is going to work well because we had our extruded surface and a tangency applied to it. So that means when we mirror this, we're going to have that nice smooth transition there as well. So we need to drag this endpoint out and make sure that we have approximately the same curvature. For the bottom section, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to again apply a 3-point arc. We have a very minimal amount of curvature down here, so we need to zoom in real close. Again, I'm going to apply a tangency with that bottom edge and drag this to roughly the place where I think it matches with our image. I'm going to fix this endpoint. Up top, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing and fix this endpoint. And you can see that fully defines both of those arcs. The next thing we want to look at is how to create the rest of this geometry. We could do this in a few parts. We could create an arc here and fill it between them. We could do some splines, or we could create some geometry using some other options such as conic or parabola. We have to be real careful here because there are a few tricks that you need to know when you're dealing with surfaces. For instance, a line has no curvature. It's going to be a 0 radius of curvature. Something like an arc or a fillet is going to be a constant radius of curvature. If we draw a spline, for instance, if we start here, we come down, we add a few points, we can apply a tangent relation here or an equal curvature relation. Basically, the difference between a tangent and equal curvature are going to be driving the weight of the handle of your spline. So if we apply a tangent relation here, you can see things get a little bit crazy because we have some extra points inducing curvature there. We can move these around and create that geometry. But when we right click on this spline, we can display the curvature combs and take a look at the radius of curvature of that part. Now, if we were to do that on something like an arc, we're going to get the same distance curvature combs or hairs across the entire part. So this is important to note because this shows up in your surfaces because we are dealing with 3D here. So you have to be real careful when you plan out your geometry here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this spline and start to create some of this extra geometry. So let's go ahead and start at the bottom and work our way up. So I'm going to grab a 3-point arc. I'm just going to drag it over here, give it some sort of arbitrary number again, and then apply a relation. I'm going to do a tangent relation, and I'm going to fix this endpoint. The next thing I want to do is start a spline. So we want to look approximately where the curvature changes direction from concave to convex. I'm going to start right there, drag it down to this endpoint, then hit escape. As kind of a point of reference, I always try to do my splines using only the start and end point. If I need to induce more curvature, I go back and add spline points at a later time, but I find that you get much better results when you only use a start and end point and don't try to induce too much curvature. So let's apply a tangent relation here. I'm going to pull the weight of this handle down a little bit, and I'm going to drag this handle around. And what we want to do is get roughly along the line here that's basically between light and shadow. Zoom out and kind of take a look at what we have here. So you can see that maybe we have a little bit too much curvature. I'm going to delete my fixed point here, and I'm going to drag this down and try to get a pretty close approximation, and then I'm going to refix it. You can see when we zoom out, that looks a little bit closer to that curvature. So I'm going to come up top, I'm going to fix this endpoint, and then I'm going to try to create the geometry to finish off the rest of this. Again, I'm going to use a 3-point arc in this corner here. And I'm going to go ahead and add one up top as well. I'm going to apply a tangent relation. Apply a tangent relation up here as well. And then as long as these look pretty close, I can go ahead and fix their endpoints. And then we can control the rest of this with a spline. So I'm going to add a tangency relation here as well and add one to the bottom. So I think that's pretty close. We might have a little bit too much curvature in this area. So I'm going to take the weight of that handle and drag it back a little bit. Maybe delete our fixed relation and move this down. See if we can get a little bit closer and then refix that point. All right, so now I think we can take this sketch and we can trim our surface. So the sketch is still selected when we exit. So with it still selected, I'm going to go to our trim surface option. You can see in the surfaces section, we have trim type, standard or mutual, and then we have some selection options at the bottom. Standard is going to be using something like a sketch or a surface to trim another surface. If we use mutual, it's going to take two surfaces that intersect, and you can knit those together at the same time as trim. What I want to do is a standard trim using our sketch, and I'm going to say remove selection, get rid of this excess out here. I'm going to hide our sketch picture and kind of take a look at the geometry we have. As we look at it, this geometry might not be exactly what we're looking for. We don't really get a whole lot of drop out of this. So even though we've already created all our geometry, we can go back to our boundary surface. We can edit some of our geometry here. So let's take a look at moving this number from 220 down to 150 and maybe reducing the weight of this handle to 200. That gives a little bit more weight to this handle. Let's go to 150. Let's drop this to 150. And let's maybe drop this down to 8 instead of 18. Okay, so you can see we've induced a lot more curvature in this part, and that might be a little bit closer to what the actual airbag is going to be. Now, if we want, we can also go back to our extruded surface and maybe drop this number down to 30 instead of 35 and get a little bit more curvature down this section as well. Now again, because we don't have reference dimensions and we only have a certain number of reference pictures, a lot of this is going to have to be based on what you think should be right and what looks right after you create the surface. Don't be afraid to go back and modify these surfaces after the fact. They are very easy to modify as long as you define everything properly, add your relations, add some dimensions, and you can control them at any point in time.